Hello, my friends, and welcome to another RobCast. I'm here in the back house with Mustafa Rony Zeno.
That's right.
Did I get that?
You got that right.
Okay, so there's all kinds of background I can give here, but Mustafa has produced this film called Dalya's Other Country. This film, my friends, we're going to get to the film at some point, but thank you so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me. This is
I
awesome.
literally watched the film and I was like, oh, I want to ask about this. I want to ask about this. So I'm just going to fire away. And I'm just going to say up front, any questions that you're like, this guy doesn't know anything. You know what I'm saying? I'd like a blanket pass on all ignorance.
That's always welcome. I love questions that go into really...
Because you're you're one of the producers of the film.
Yeah,
you're also,
I co-produced it with the director, Julia Meltzer.
Yes. And I have questions for her as well.
Okay.
You're also like in the film.
Right.
So I had my own like, oh, I would like to ask him about this, and this. So at some point we'll get to the film and how people can watch it and all that. But let's start with you grew up in Syria.
So I was actually born in LA.
Oh, really?
I was, but I moved to Syria when I was 5. I grew up in Syria. I did K through 12 in Syria, and then when it was time for college, I came back here.
Where in LA? You were born?
I was born in Santa Monica, actually. Yeah. And when I came back to Southern California, I first lived in San Diego, and then moved around a little bit, and then finally made my way back to LA again.
Tell me, so Syria was age 5 to age 19, and
right.
all the family is all there.
Yes. So my heritage on both sides is Syrian for many, many centuries.
Literally centuries?
Yeah, literally.
And you can trace it back.
I can trace it back to 300 or 400 years on both sides.
Whoa.
And when my mom and my dad got married, my dad brought my mom over here because my dad came here for college. Let me start again. So my dad came here for college. When it was time for him to get married, he married my mom, who was at the time living in Saudi Arabia. She came here, and then his family followed, and then her family followed. And then, like, next thing you know, there's, like, a bunch of people from both their families who all came because of my dad, and all, like, created businesses here and created families. And then at some point, things in Syria were good, and they all wanted to move back. And, you know, many Syrians have this, like, really strong connection with their country, and so when things were good, they all moved back to Syria. Both sides. I don't think there was really anyone left here in the U.S.
Oh, really? And how do they determine good? When you're essentially not exile, but when you're out of where you're from,
right?
What determines okay, it's good, we can go back?
So most of my family, they first came here for economic reasons. Things just economically in Syria at the time, 60s, 70s, 80s were not really that great. And so they came here, and at some point in the 90s, things were starting to look better. So in the 90s and 2000s, many of them went back. Until the war happened.
Right.
And then they all again had to move here again.
So you're born here, then you moved to Syria. What is life like from age 5 to age 19? What's life like in Syria?
I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to grow up in Syria, especially, I mean, obviously after what has been going on there for the past few years. But really, life in Syria, I mean, you grew up there. I'm from Aleppo, and so most people know Aleppo now because of the war. But I mean, the thing that really actually upsets me about the way that people know Aleppo now is that Aleppo is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It has been inhabited for at least 10,000, if not 15,000 years, continuously. And so growing up in Aleppo, you grew up definitely with this sense of history, sense of tradition, sense of being connected to the past in a way that living here in the U.S. I don't really feel.
Yes.
And so really, I'm really so grateful to have had the chance to grow up there, grow up with our culture and our different folkloric and cultural practices, and it really is I think really informs my life in a way that I don't think otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we see images of Aleppo, sort of carcasses of buildings, but you grew up, it was a beautiful,
Very.
ancient/modern city. Did you grow up in the city?
I grew up in the city. Yeah.
So you can walk everywhere. There's markets.
Totally.
There's friends you see on the street. It's like it's a good life.
It's so great because it's pretty. I mean, pretty cosmopolitan. There's like about 4.5 million people in Aleppo, but at the same time, it's a pretty small city. Like you said, you can walk places. You can go to markets. Really, I mean, taking a cab from one end of the city to the other end is like a 10-minute ride.
Really?
15-minute ride maybe, and so it's so accessible. You have all 4 seasons. Winter is actually really cold, and sometimes it snows, and summer is really hot, and you have fall and spring, and it's great, and it is a very large small town. Everyone knows everyone, and of course there are positives and negatives to that, as many people who live in small towns know. But it's really I miss it so much. I really miss it so much.
I can feel that. So Syria, what other, Aleppo, there's Damascus. Are there other big cities in Syria?
There are several big cities. So actually, Aleppo is larger than Damascus, even though Damascus is the capital.
Okay.
There's Homs, which we also heard a lot about in the...
Homs?
Homs, Homs.
Oh, okay.
That the destruction there was really, really bad before things started getting bad in Aleppo. And there's Hama, and there's Latakia, there's Tartus, there's Raqqa, where ISIS is camped out right now. There are a few large cities, but the largest ones are definitely...
And growing up, you've been to all those... You travel around Syria.
You know what? Growing up in Syria, you kind of grow up in your bubble wherever you are.
Really?
I only started traveling... I mean, I traveled to Damascus, and then on the way to Damascus, there's Hama and Homs, and you kind of stop on the way. But really, I mean, other than visiting Damascus every once in a while, and maybe Latakia, because Latakia's on the Mediterranean... I really didn't travel around a lot. I really was mainly in Aleppo. It's only after I moved here to the U.S. that I wanted to kind of explore the rest of my culture and history. And so when I went back, I would try to go to all these places I'd never known about before.
You had to leave in order to be like, oh, wait, the thing that was
Totally.
back there is actually quite interesting.
Totally.
Now, your family's Muslim.
Yes.
And was Aleppo, growing up in Aleppo, is everybody Muslim?
No. So we have a huge Christian community. Historically, we had also a huge Jewish community, something that when I grew up did not exist anymore, and something that in my adult life also was a huge interest of mine. I traveled and did a lot of research about this Syrian Jewish community because it's a community that I would hear a lot about, but it was nowhere really to be found. And we have a huge, as far as Christians go, we have a huge Armenian community, many of whom moved to Syria actually after the Armenian genocide.
Oh my word! So the Armenians leave Armenia because it gets bad.
Right.
They move to Syria, which then gets bad.
Right. And so...
Which then they have to move again.
Yeah, exactly. So it's ironic because many of those Syrians... I live in Glendale here in LA, and it's a huge Armenian community there. And so many Syrians actually came here and Armenians came to Glendale, and now are refugees here in the U.S., but live amongst the Armenians because of the similarity in culture.
It's funny because I was talking to a dude. I met a guy who said he was a youth pastor from North Dakota, like Sioux Falls or something. And I made a joke, something like, wow, so I picture just kids who grew up on farms. Honestly, that's and he's like, actually, my youth group's mostly Iraqis.
That's funny.
And it was just such a funny, Sioux Falls, whatever, South Dakota is where most, lots of Iraqis come.
Refugees, totally.
And it's just so fascinating how certain pockets around the world, a certain group when things have gotten bad, go there.
Yeah.
So Glendale, California.
That's where it's at.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So were you a minority as a Muslim in Aleppo?
So no, you're definitely not a minority. I mean, I think Muslims in Aleppo are about 70%.
Oh, okay.
And so you're still a majority, but there are huge minorities of other types of people.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of similar with all of Syria. I mean, Syria has many people might know, a lot of really old Christian history. Also, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world is in Syria. We have the Syriac people who still speak some form of Aramaic, a form of Aramaic that Jesus probably would not have understood. They probably would not understand Jesus. It is something that many of them are really proud of, but there's definitely a connection there, but it is not mutually intelligible with yeah.
So why do you leave this city that you love and go to school in the States?
So
you're 19.
I was 19. I tried to dabble with the idea of staying in Aleppo for college, but really universities in Syria were just not that great, especially when it was time for me to go to college. Most of the universities were public universities. Most education was public education. There was really a lot of control by the government over. I went to technically a private school, grade K through 12, but it really, it was pretty much public. The curriculum was what the public school system kind of forced you to go through, and it was just a lot of memorization, and we didn't really have labs. And you grow up knowing a lot of science and math, and it's very, very science heavy. And so when I came here to the U.S., I was already like in very advanced, calculus. But I was forced to do like college algebra, and I was like, I did this in like 8th grade. I really don't want to do this. So it's great for things like that. But I am now a filmmaker, and that's just not something. The arts in general nowadays in Syria, sadly, are not really a huge focus. Historically, Syria, and especially Aleppo, has been a huge center for the arts. But yeah, so I didn't really have a lot of opportunities, and I have American citizenship, and so my dad really didn't want me to come back to the U.S. because he didn't want me, because he had spent a lot of time here in the U.S. and he had kind of lost himself here, and he ended up losing out on spending a lot of time with his family in Syria because of it, and so he really didn't want me to go through the same thing.
He hints at that in the film. I have a bunch of questions about your father.
Yeah.
Like classic, like Star Wars, your father. We're going to have to talk about your father. It's the film, and we're skipping ahead here, my friends.
That's fine.
But the presence of your father in the film. So I'm going to have to keep on track here because I want to leap ahead to him. So you come to the States. Your father doesn't want you to come to the States.
Yes.
And where do you go to school?
I went to a bunch of community colleges and then ended up at Cal State Northridge at CSUN.
But there aren't families all back in Syria.
Family is mostly in Syria. I have some of my mom's family in Temecula, which is an hour and a half southeast of LA. But most of my family is in Syria. Yeah.
Did you go back and forth from LA to Syria?
I did. I would visit about every year and a half. I would go back.
And at that time, Syria is peaceful.
Yes, it's great.
Has Assad come to power yet?
Assad, the father, has been in power since the 1970.
So you grew up with Assad the father?
Yes, I grew up with Assad the father.
Who was at least tolerated, or?
So it's, both the father and the son are really bittersweet. They're both dictators. There's no way, around that. At the same time, the country was extremely safe under both of them. You didn't really have, there were a lot of civil liberties that you didn't have. There was no freedom of press, and, freedom of expression was definitely controlled. But it was a very, very safe place to grow up in.
Did you talk about this with people? It was just a common thing you talk about. Hey, there's no freedom of press.
Not outwardly. With your friends, it's kind of known, and you kind of talk about it privately. But publicly, it's not something you really talk about. And so, basically, living in Syria, it's like if you stay out of the hair of the government and don't criticize the government, you live a great life. For the most part, there are definitely people who benefit from the system more than others, and there are definitely, there's definitely corruption where if you sleep with the government, you can make money in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, and so there are definitely these dynamics like that. But for the most part, if you just kept to yourself, you live a great life.
So, and people would use the word dictator. We live under a dictator.
Again, privately, not publicly.
But that would be a common thing among friends. Is
yes. That was a well-known thing, and that was, and you kind of you learn how to speak in code, and you would have to go on these like mandatory kind of marches, showing support to the president, and no one really took it seriously. No one really cared that much.
So this is always my question. So you would be asked like show up at whatever square at 9 a.m. for whatever. Did you have to wear anything special?
I mean, well, you would wear you would be asked, to leave basically school to go to these things. And you're like, of course, I'll leave school to go to that. Basically, it's a field trip to go and show your support to the president. And no one really believed, whatever they were chanting or marching for. But they were like, all right, it's better than going to school.
Which was our leader is great. Long live Syria.
Yeah, we will give our soul and our blood for you.
But you and your friends are like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Have you heard the new Killers album?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, totally.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, then, so you're here. Then Assad's son comes to power, who's kind of more of the same.
More of the same. There was a lot of hope that it was going to be a lot better. He seemed to be more open. He's younger. He kind of, I don't know, he kind of came, he wanted to be the cool president. And so people were really excited about it in the beginning. And the things were really good for a few years. There was something called the Damascus Spring back then, before the Arab Spring, before anything like that. But then very soon...
Like an uprising.
It wasn't an uprising. No, this was a spring because Bashar al-Assad, the son, he had actually just made things a lot better for people. There was just more freedom. Again, arts were flourishing again, and people were just... I don't know, happier for a while. And then soon he just became more and more of the same as his father.
Heavy-handed.
Yes.
Violent, essentially.
Exactly.
And then when you speak of the war then happens when?
2011 is when that started, March of 2011.
And that is an organized rebellion against Assad.
So it started out as actually something that was not organized at all. It just kind of happened. And it was something where a bunch of kids, they were seeing things on the news about uprisings happening in Egypt, and they started chanting kind of similar chants that we want to topple the regime. And there were literally a bunch of kids, and then the army responded in a very aggressive manner. And that's when it was a small town kind of close to Damascus, and that's when the people of that town kind of came up and were like upset about it, and were like, these are kids, and they were just kind of saying things, and these children were killed. And so they tried to, again, get their voice heard. No one was hearing them. Again, they were being muted, and then soon after that just started getting larger and larger. And by the time, maybe a month or two in, the president did end up apologizing for the way that they responded to,
because the government
kids.
Killed a bunch of kids.
Exactly.
And the government Assad acknowledged
a few months later that might have been not a great idea, but it was too late, because they had already messed up and people were already upset. And I mean, and then when you live under dictatorship for a really long time, you have a lot of emotions that are just kind of bottled up for a really long time. And then so once these emotions come out, it's like the floodgates are open, and it's hard to close that up.
It's like it takes somebody. I mean, you hate to say it takes a death or a sacrifice,
right.
But kids get killed by the government, and somehow it breaks open something that can't be put back together.
Exactly.
And then people feel emboldened, and then more people feel emboldened, and then someone dies, and that inspires them.
Exactly.
And then now you have a revolt or rebellion.
A revolt, a rebellion, a civil war, a proxy war. It's a lot of things at once.
And this starts in 2011. When does Aleppo become the center of the conflict?
Not until about a year later. Aleppo is the economic center of Syria. There's a lot of industry there. It's really, I mean, most of most people are some form of really entrepreneurs of some sort. And so it is a really important place to have, if you want to be in power. And so it's not until about a year after until things started getting bad, and that's when my family moved to the U.S.
Yeah. And then when we started seeing those images of Aleppo in the Western media?
Right. That was probably about a couple years in.
And that's when you see whole blocks that have just been bombed out. So this was a flourishing cosmopolitan city in the center of the world, your home that raised you.
Right.
When you start seeing images of streets you used to walk that are just blown apart, what's that like for you?
I mean, honestly, I don't think that 6 years later, I don't think I've dealt with those images yet, honestly.
Really?
It's really, really difficult. Like now talking about it, I'm getting a little bit choked up, honestly. It's really, really hard for so many different reasons and on so many levels because, again, like you said, this is when you see, I mean, it's like when I see somewhere else, I mean, demolished, that's not where I grew up. I'm that's really sad, but I don't know what that is and where that is and what was there before. But when you grow up in a place and then you see that same exact location, demolished, you have memories there. You remember going there, walking through there with your friends, even if you didn't live there. You remember, oh, we went to this place and we used to eat whatever falafel at this place, and we used to go to the Turkish bathhouse and in this place, and so it's so different. It's really difficult, and also it's really hard because again, now people know what Syria is and what Aleppo is, and what they know it to be is very different than how I know it to be, and also very different even than what it is even today, actually. Because even what we see today, we see only the destruction in Aleppo. There's a whole part of Aleppo, the west side of Aleppo, is actually pretty much intact. I mean, life is really difficult, and people don't have water and electricity for days on end, sometimes weeks, and so life is really difficult. But life is going on, and people are, people are not victims, and that's the one thing that it really kills me to see kind of Syrians only as victims in the media, and then Syria only as a destroyed place, and I'm like, that's not the full story at all. And most Syrians do not see themselves as victims. Most Syrians, wherever they do go, all these places that often reject them, they go and they're extremely good at understanding the system, knowing how it works, and really jumping right in and really making something of themselves. I mean, Syrians, honestly, are extremely adaptable, and I think that's just a historical thing. I mean, you see Syrians, and physically they look very diverse. It's because everyone kind of went through Syria. It was just kind of the place to go through, whether you're the Moguls or the Romans or the Greeks or the Syriacs. Everyone was there. The French.
A modern Syrian is shaped by things that happened 500 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago.
Absolutely, totally.
Oh my word, that's so fascinating. So you're seeing all this. It gets bad. Aleppo gets more and more dangerous, and your sister, who at that time is 13 or 14.
13.
Your sister and mom, Dalya, and your mom's name?
Dalya and Rodina.
Dalya and Rodina.
Rodina.
They realize it's time to get out.
Yes. Yeah.
And is their only thought get to America? Do they consider multiple places to?
Well, so there could have been other possibilities, but right as the war was happening, my mom and my dad were getting a divorce. And so had they not gotten a divorce, then my mom and my sister would have probably gone to Turkey with my dad. And that's where he is right now.
Did your dad leave Aleppo the same time your mom and sister did?
A couple months after them.
So right around the same time.
Right around the same time.
Your parents divorced. We're going to get to that in a second. Your dad goes to Turkey. Were lots of people going to Turkey?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Turkey.
Similar cultures?
Very similar cultures, different religion. Very similar cultures, different language.
That's right.
And, yes. I mean, my dad really feels
From Arabic to Turkish?
Turkish, exactly. Yes. There are a lot of words in Turkish that are Arabic, and there are a lot of words in Aleppan Arabic that are from Turkish because we're so close to each other. But yes, the languages are completely different, and so it's really, I mean, even people going to Turkey. Or when you see refugees in the news, I mean, I think people don't really understand what it means to leave Syria, to go to Turkey, or to go to, Greece, or to go to these other countries. It's not that easy. People are like, oh my God, there's so much destruction there. Why aren't people like? Why is your family still there? And I still have my aunts and a lot of my cousins there, a lot of extended family. They're like, why are they still there? And I'm like, again, one, it's not as bad as you think. It's horrible, but it's not as bad as you think. And two, it's a really huge deal to leave your city, your country, a place where you understand the system, the language, the culture. You have some, you have some support to go somewhere, even next door in Turkey or even Lebanon, a place where it speaks the same language. It's extremely difficult.
It's interesting what you said. When we see images of some war-torn area, you just said two things. It's horrible and it's not as bad as you think.
Totally.
And it's both of those at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
In some ways, I think in some ways it's worse than you think, and it's better than you think both at once.
Oh, my word.
Really?
Okay, so your mom and sister decide to come to L.A. Your sister is going to be a freshman in high school.
Yes, sir.
Who thought we should film my sister coming to America to start high school, having known only Syria?
So that idea was actually, at the time I was working with Julia Meltzer. She's a film director who had directed a film about a girls' Quran school in Syria. Julia had spent some time in Syria and made this documentary about a world that I felt like I should have known, but I had no idea anything about until I came.
She's an American?
She's an American.
So an American made a Syrian film,
Yes.
and you as a Syrian in America were like, I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about. So I watched the film. I was like, this is great. I'm like, this is a world I have no idea anything about. And she kind of portrayed it in such an honesty and intimacy and realism that I really, really appreciated. And I was like, I want to work on this film with you. And so I helped her with distribution on The Light in Her Eyes. And while I was working with her, that's when my mom and my sister moved here to the U.S. And Julia had spent some time in Aleppo, and she was really devastated about what was going on there. And she was like asking me about different families that were coming here, and she wanted to film, some families and follow them to kind of show also how, the war halfway around the world affects people, here in LA even. And she was like, well, what about your mom and your sister? And I was like, actually, that's a really good idea, because I had already started to see kind of the beginning of their arcs. And I already started seeing them kind of start changing. My sister was going through phases so quickly, trying different things out. I can tell that she was trying to find herself. And I was like, I bet there are going to be some really interesting things, that happen with them. And I think a lot of people go through similar things, and I think it'd be really important to document this.
Oh, my word. I don't want to give too much of the film away. Did you know that your sister is kind of magnetic? Have people said this to you?
Not
She's
really.
Strangely compelling.
Yeah.
Can we all agree? She's strange.
She is. She's great.
You're kind of riveted. She's like at what point, when I first meet her in the film, how old is she?
She was 13 still.
And she's talking like 13-year-old girl, I'm thinking.
Right.
And yet, you're in.
Yeah.
You're hooked.
She's great on camera. I am not. I get really clammy when I get in front of the camera, and
when we first meet you, you're a little mumbly.
I'm a little mumbly.
You're a little mumblecore.
I'm total mumblecore. Totally. I mean, I mumble in general, but especially when I'm on camera.
But she's so clear and articulate.
She is. She's great. Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea, actually. I had no idea.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know. I mean, I knew she was like, she's a very like happy, smiley, bubbly person. She is. But I mean, as my sister, I'm just like, you're annoying. You're like an annoying kid. I mean, obviously, I love her very, very much, but you're a sibling. You don't see your sibling in the same way. But when I started seeing the footage, I was like, you're really good on camera. Yeah.
Did she know it?
No.
What did she think about having a movie made about her?
She has she still has no idea that she's so good on camera. She still has no idea that she's good in interviews. She's still like, oh my God, that interview was so horrible. And everyone's like, what are you talking about?
Because when we meet her, she's in LA. You're like, oh, the odds are stacked against her. You feel her loneliness. You feel her. She has the hijab. I gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Hijab.
Good shot. Yeah.
She's the only girl in the school.
Yes.
And you're just like, this is not, I mean, part of you as the viewer is like, this is not going to go well.
Yeah, right.
This is not,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I want to see where this goes. So then you follow her. I mean, the film, for viewers, when all of a sudden I realized, I think we're going to follow her for a while. The film takes place over 4 years.
Over her
So we
high school
kind of
years.
watch a girl go all the way through high school. By the way, the dance scene is unbelievable.
Yeah, she's...
Because of how when we first meet her to the dance did you know that's magic? Were you as a film producer like, that's magic?
You know what?
That we get to show that.
So I try to stay away from the footage and what was going on as much as possible. I left that to Julia. So I didn't really see these things. I saw the dance scene. I saw all these things separately. I didn't see them strung out until pretty late. And so when I saw the dance scene, I was like, I had no idea my sister was so good. But yeah, no. At the time, I had no idea, and that's really one of the blessings about having a film made about your family, and taking these like somewhat really really mundane moments of your life and kind of stringing them all out over 4 years. It's really a testament to how powerful documentary filmmaking is.
Yes.
It's really, to be able to see your life in kind of a bird's eye view is really so powerful, and it really kind of gives perspective. All of us are going through our life, in the grind every day, and things are hard, and you're just kind of pushing through, but when you're able to step back and really look at your life over several years, you're like, it's worth it. All of this, the daily grind is totally worth it. Things are not stagnant. Things do change over years. And it's really great.
Yeah, I had that sense watching the film, what a gift.
Yeah.
You gave yourself to produce this film, because it's... Okay, now, I don't want to give too much of the film away, but partway through the film, your dad shows up. We find out that the reason your parents divorced is because your dad married another woman,
right?
As is his understanding of the Muslim faith,
right?
I'm allowed to marry multiple women, so I'm going to.
Right.
Your mom is like, no. She has her own interpretation of Quran, which I think later on was kind of awesome, very awesome. But we'll get to that in a second. So then your dad shows up in LA. How did you think it was going to go? There's obviously a lot of love.
Right.
But I also have to imagine you were like, we're going to film this. What are we thinking? This could...
Yeah. I really didn't know how it was going to go. I knew how I hoped that it would go. I hoped that it would not work out, that he would come back and try to, get back with my mom. I was hoping it wouldn't work out.
Because that would mean your mom had at some level taken steps back, or how you ever say it?
I think yeah, in a way, yes, because I think in a way, people, they got divorced for a reason. It wasn't just the marriage thing. That was one of the things, but I think it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And for us as kids, and my sister says this in the film, she's like, I would rather them not, honestly. When they're together, they're not that pleasant. So I'd rather them.
Yeah. I remember her mentioning that.
Yeah, and so for that reason, I think my mom. It was really difficult for my mom to be on her own for the first time in a really long time, and so I think part of her really wanted for it to work out. But I knew, really, as an outsider, that she was much happier, on her own than she ever was with him. And
she has this line about how I have my kids.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Right.
That's just, you're like, oh yeah, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's really, I think for her, it really is about, she has her kids around her. My brother is in New York, so he's not really close, and he comes and visits. But I think for her, at the end of the day, it's like, no, I mean, I have my kids around me. I don't really need to be with someone that is not going to, I don't know, treat me the way that I feel like I should be treated. And I think that's where, I mean, so the multiple marriages thing, it's kind of emblematic of that in a way that, I mean, my mom and my dad, like you said, have different interpretations of the Quran. My dad has a certain type of conservative interpretation. That's not a straight conservative interpretation, because actually a very conservative interpretation of the concept of multiple marriages, in the Quran it says you can marry 2, 3, or 4 wives. 4 meaning max. At the time, that came down as a limitation, because before Islam, men could marry an unlimited amount of wives, and so at that time it was like, what are you talking about? Only 4? That's BS.
Only 4 was oddly a step towards progress.
Exactly. So actually that verse is a really...
that right there sort of blows your mind.
So that verse was a really revolutionary verse at the time. It was kind of like, no, you can't marry unlimited, you can marry maximum 4. And then the context that you could marry 4, it was in the context of, if you are taking care of orphans and you fear that you can't really take care of them, and you marry their mothers basically as a way of taking care of the mom and the orphans meaning without a dad, then most times the multiple marriages are mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in that prism.
It's like a legal setup to protect.
To provide to people who, again, at the time, with, a lot of wars, there were a lot of men that would go to war and never come back. And so there was a need, and especially the way that, societies happened back then, they were very patriarchal. Women could not, just go out and work in the same way that they can today. And so the system was really put in place for that. And so...
Which is still fascinating, because you're describing polygamy, and I'm kind of like, that's not something I'm going to be for, and yet you're putting it in its historic context, and I'm at least going, oh, I hadn't understood that angle.
Right.
Which is kind of what I do with the Bible all the time.
Right. Yeah, right.
Something you're like, no, that's bad. Yeah, I don't even know what I'm thinking.
Yeah. But when you go back and actually put it into the context of historical context, you're like, actually, this is pretty revolutionary. And so that's my understanding.
And that would have been a move forward. Yeah, got it.
Exactly. And so that for me, I mean, I know that it came, those verses came down at the time for a very specific reason that was very positive. And I think if we continue on with the spirit of that, then multiple marriages are not only not required today, because we live in different, especially here in the U.S. I mean, I think there are still places around the world where it's really difficult maybe for women to provide for themselves. And I think maybe there is a place for that. But for the most part, I think in our modern context, I think not only is there not a need for that, but if we are going to continue on with the same spirit of that verse, this is really about women's rights,
Okay, because that's what comes up with your mom.
Mm-hmm.
Is your mom is, I don't know what the word is, evolving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your mom is like, I'm not going to live dominated, or whatever language you would use, by a man.
Yeah, yeah.
She's like refusing certain cultural codes, religious codes, and I feel that feels like a bass note of the film, which is fascinating to me when I saw that it's directed by Julia, and I think the other producer was a woman who, of course, I have 1,000 questions for them as well. But it was like, this takes a great, only a woman could make a film this good.
Yeah.
In essence, because she's just showing what happens when women are like, no, we're not going to do this anymore.
I mean, really, our whole team are women, except for me. And that was a huge asset to the film for sure. I think my mom would have never felt this comfortable
opened up and talked about something.
And open up to someone if it wasn't really, Julia, the cinematographer, the sound person. I mean, really, like everyone, the whole. Do
you think Julia would come on the RobCast?
I think she would. Yeah.
Does she live around here?
She does. She lives in Silver Lake. Yeah.
Can you put in a good word for me?
Absolutely.
Okay. So your dad shows up, and what I thought was so fascinating. First off, all we know as the viewer is he took another wife. So we're like, I mean, in our basic viewing of films, we're like, bad guy.
Right.
But we know that your sister loves him. So we're like, well, she loves him because it's her dad, obviously.
Right.
Then he shows up and we love him because we're like, he's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, or he's dad.
Right.
Like we
He's
want to
dad.
kiss him on each cheek like you do.
Right.
We're like, and then we see that he's very, very devout Muslim, and we're like, fair play.
Yeah.
But then it's like what matters to him is that your sister is a good Muslim.
Right. Right.
It's almost like you wear the hijab.
Right. Right.
He like takes this whole thing, because you as the viewer are like, go, because we want your sister. It's like the odds are stacked against it. She's making it, and what he's excited about. Did you? I mean, obviously you put all that in the film on purpose,
Right.
Because part of it's like, oh man, this is tough.
Yeah.
And then later, of course, when she says to the camera she's a feminist,
Right.
and he's asking her what time she's gonna be home from prom, you're like, I mean, this is a story of everybody from every tribe.
Right.
Everybody from every religion who's been given a way of being, and then they keep going, they keep growing, they keep expanding. I mean, I thought of every person I've ever talked to from a tribe where the elders of the tribe are like, this is how it's done, and they're like, you don't understand how the world is.
Exactly.
I mean, at that moment, the film goes from the particular to the universal, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
We're talking
totally,
about
totally.
everybody who's...
Yeah. I love that that's what you saw, because I mean I think that's exactly, I mean, dealing with these issues about the hijab and about multiple marriages and these issues, I mean, for me, as you know, with the Big Brother hat now,
Yes.
it's a vulnerable thing. I mean, to talk to people about, yeah, my dad had a second wife, like that's like so taboo here in the US.
Right.
But I firmly believe,
Does that
as a
come up with your
filmmaker,
friends here in LA?
It does sometimes, not a lot.
And how do people respond?
I think people shy away from really delving deep into it.
I find it fascinating.
I mean, I think it's completely fascinating. And so, again, with the filmmaker hat on, I completely believe that if you really go deep enough into these cultural practices that, you know, when you first look at them, you're like, those are so weird. I don't understand how these people do this, or that's really backwards, or this is really that. Or you're judgmental. But if you really go deep enough into it, you really understand it in a way, like you said, that becomes really universal, because you understand it at a visceral level that is not just like this rational, like, you know, A plus B equals C. You really understand actually what the value of a lot of these cultural practices are. And so, for instance, again, for my sister, wearing the headscarf is a really important part of who she is today. And what that meant over, you know, the time of the film that changes. But nonetheless, it is something that really anchors her.
Yes.
And really something that is absolutely has been a source of strength for my sister.
Because you're honestly watching the film like, oh, there's going to be a final scene, like the final, like end of Footloose. She's going to like hair flying. She's going to throw that thing off, and she's going to, and instead she's like, no, actually, I like it.
Yeah.
It means something to me.
And I think this is a really important thing because...
But did I just reference Footloose?
Footloose.
Seriously.
Well, she loves,
my apologies.
She loves Footloose.
Well,
so. Right.
There we go then.
It's apt.
I do my research.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important story to show, because I think so often in the U.S. and in Western media in general, we're like, liberate the Muslim women, you know, it's America now. Like, they don't have to wear that anymore. Like, they're not forced to wear it anymore. Like, they can take it off now. And we actually, like, we had the New York Times Opdocs piece, and like you read the comments, which were surprisingly positive. Actually, I was really surprised about that. But then, you know, some of them are like, don't worry, honey, like, you're living in America now. You don't have to wear it anymore. And I'm like, did you, like, miss the whole point of this? Like, she actually really likes it. She enjoys it. This is a source of strength for her. Why would you take that away from someone? Isn't feminism and, like, you know, isn't, like, progress in feminism about actually empowering people to define who they are for their own selves?
And so what is often seen as anti-feminist, you're simply saying, hold on.
Right.
Let people own their own expression, their own rituals, their own traditions, their own...
Yeah.
Because you have no idea what the spirit is animating the form. It may be something that you've completely missed.
Totally. And I think the hijab for some women could be oppressive. That definitely can exist. I'm not going to say the hijab is a feminist symbol. I'm not going to make it that. I think it depends on, it's a tool. It's a piece of cloth, really. It's just a piece of cloth. And it really is whatever that person wearing it makes of it, or whatever their experience of it is. And so I think that, again, going specific with each person's specific experience with something is really, really important to, again, humanize people and not to kind of just cast with a wide.
Absolutely. You know, Ramdas often makes the distinction in a lot of his writings between form and spirit. Two people may be doing the same thing in form, but it's animated by completely different spirits.
Totally.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So now I'm trying to think of details about the film. Where can people see the film?
So,
because not all many people are going to want to see the film.
Well, the film just premiered on PBS last night, actually.
And it's called?
It's called Dalya's Other Country.
Okay, Dalya's Other Country.
If you just
Dalya.
Exactly. DALYA''S, Other Country.
Yep.
And if you go to PBS and look up Dalya's Other Country, you will both find your local listings, and you can watch it on your local PBS channel. It's going to be screening many times in the next few weeks. Also, you're able to stream it on pbs.org.
Oh, great.
And just watch it on your computer.
Fantastic. And have you done screenings around the country or around?
We have done a few screenings. We just premiered at the LA Film Fest just a couple of weeks ago. We had another screening here in LA. We had a screening in San Diego. We have screenings all over the U.S. and we will be having through PBS. We will be having a lot of screenings. And if anyone is interested in screening it in their hometown, please reach out.
How do people get a hold of you, or how to get a hold of the film?
So you can follow us on Facebook and on Instagram at Dalya's Other Country. On Twitter, we're at Dalya's OC. On our website is dalyasothercountry.com. Really, any of those ways you can reach out to us, and yeah, we'd love to set up a screening.
And what does your sister think about all this?
She loves the film. She is ambivalent about sharing her life with the world.
Yes, I can see that
way. But I think for the most part, I think she really, it was a really empowering thing for her. Again, to see herself, being completely just fresh off the boat 4 years ago, and then where she's arrived today, I think it really kind of gave her perspective in a way that she otherwise would not have had.
Did your mom come to a screening?
Yeah, definitely. They were both at the premiere. My mom loves it also. She invited all of her friends to come to the premiere, and it was a big party.
And your dad knows about all this?
Yeah. My dad knows about all of this. He saw the film too, and he, of course, he had. We have our differences on how we see things, but but he's my dad, and we're his family, and
and we do in the film. We pick up tremendous love between all of you and your father.
I mean, honestly, my dad growing up was really the most loving father you could ever ask for, honestly.
Yeah, you can pick it up in the film.
You see, my mom is a hard ass. My mom, she's a really tough woman.
You know, I was actually, I don't know, I mean, is there an Arabic for badass? Because your mom, there are a number of times when you're like, your mom.
She's a complete badass.
Yeah, that was one of my final questions was going to be about your mom. Because
yeah, she is. And so actually, my mom was just like,
she goes to college when she gets here.
She does. She
goes to college. Graduates.
She graduates. And then, yeah.
It's so awesome.
Yeah. And she's continuing on. And people who will watch the film will see where she goes.
Because there's a line in the film where she says, my entire life was cooking and taking care of kids and entertaining people in my home.
Right.
And then she goes back to school, and you're like, and she says, technology, all this is brand new, and that yet she actually goes after it.
Oh my God. My mom is made of 100% grit.
Absolutely.
She's literally she was the one growing up who was just really hard on us and tough love, and you have to make her bed, and you have to help out in the home, and my dad was like, oh no, don't worry, honey. Here's an orange. Just I want to make sure you're getting your nutrition. And so it's really, I mean, it's really great to have kind of grown up with both. But yeah, I mean, my dad really was a very, very loving father. I mean, you don't see it enough in the film because he's not here. But really, I could not have hoped for a more caring father.
Well, I mean, thank you for making this. It was very, very interesting. I'm sure I'll have 5 hours more of questions later. But yes, people, anything you want to add at the end?
Yes, I'm gonna say, please reach out to the local refugees wherever you live. There are refugees everywhere. There are immigrants everywhere. It's really difficult to be living in a country, in a world that you did not grow up in. Please reach out to people, get to know them, understand who they are, and maybe use your own privilege of really being of the system and helping them out. I think it really a little bit of time and a good ear really goes a long way.
Oh, so well said. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So inspiring.
This is so much fun.
You're so articulate. It's just so good. Seriously.
Thank you.
My friends, grace and peace.